والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما ولي الله الحجة ابن الحسن صاحب الأمر والزمان، روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة، يا غريب الغرباء، يا مظلوم كربلاء، السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته، السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته، السلام على ساكن كربلاء، فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، يا سادتي، فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال مولانا إمام جعفر بن محمد وهو أصدق الصادقين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه: من بات عند قبر الحسين عليه السلام ليلة عاشوراء لقى الله يوم القيامة وهو ملتخ بدمائه كأنه قتل مع الحسين في عصبته. صدق الإمام وآمنا به. أحبائي, tonight is the night of the greatest tragedy to befall upon this entire universe. A tragedy that symbolizes the ultimate battle between Haqq and Batil. Tonight is the eve of that revolution of Sayyid al-Shuhada that did not only represent the message of Amir al-Mu'mineen, did not only represent the message of Rasulullah, did not only represent the message of Islam, but the event or the battle of Karbala, the revolution of Ashura, the revolution of Sayyid al-Shuhada represented the battle of the entire Anbiya from Adam to Khatam. The day of Ashura represents the day for which Imam Hussein fought for the values of Nabi Adam. The day of Ashura represents the day when Imam Hussein stood up to defend the values of Nabi Nuh. The day of Ashura represents the day when Sayyid al-Shuhada stood up to represent the values of Nabi Ibrahim. The day of Ashura represents the day when Sayyid al-Shuhada stood up to represent the values of Nabi Musa. The day of Ashura represents the day when Sayyid al-Shuhada stood up to represent the values of Nabi Isa. Which is why you say in Ziyaratul Waritha, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam safwatillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuhin Nabiyillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Ibrahim Khalilillah. Assalamu alayka ya waritha Isa Ruhillah. Sayyid al-Shuhada, the successor and the representation of the message of all the Anbiya. Therefore, when you look at the enemies of Imam al-Hussein, these were not only the enemies of Imam al-Hussein at a personal level or the enemies of Rasulullah, rather they were the enemies of the entire Anbiya from Adam to Khatam. To wage war against Sayyid al-Shuhada was to wage war against Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Isa. From another angle, when you see that this Madhloom Imam stood alone on the plains of Karbala to defend the values of all the Anbiya, you find that the Anbiya in their entirety are bound and have an obligation towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. They are bound by shukr to Sayyid al-Shuhada because Imam al-Hussein by himself stood up to defend the values of the entire Anbiya. Which is why you find in the ziyarah that even Nabi Nuh and Nabi Adam, Nabi Isa seek permission from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come down and perform the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein in Karbala. Had it not been for Imam al-Hussein, there could be no payam or no message for Nabi Isa. Had it not been for Sayyid al-Shuhada, the father of monotheism, Nabiullah Ibrahim, there would be no trace for him. Therefore they come down in shukr to perform the ziyarah of Sayyid al-Shuhada and acknowledge this great sacrifice of Sayyid al-Shuhada. But this tragedy and the manner in which Imam al-Hussein was martyred. Sahibul Aza, the first person or the first group of people who we give our condolences to, Maulana Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. This Ma'soom Imam whose major goal upon the dhuhur is to seek vengeance for the blood of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Now, if you read in Dua al-Nudba, the Imam teaches us to call out to him by saying, Aina talibu bidamil maktul bi Karbala. Where is the person who is going to come and avenge for the blood of Sayyid al-Shuhada? The narrations tell us that upon the dhuhur of the 12th Imam from Mecca and then his movement towards Kufa, and eventually when he comes from Kufa, he will travel to Karbala al-Muqaddas. Allah, Allah. Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman comes to Karbala in the Sahan of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He comes down into the dhari of Imam al-Hussein. He will turn towards the people and will say, Ya Ahl al-Alam, Kutila Jaddi al-Hussein Atshanan. Imam Sahib al-Amr will turn around to the Alam and will say, Oh people, my grandfather Hussein was killed thirsty. He will say, Ya Ahl al-Nas, or Ya Ayyuhan Nas, Kutila Jaddi al-Hussein Madhluman Wahida. My grandfather Hussein was killed alone while he was oppressed. Tonight is the night of Abdullah al-Radhi. The tradition mentions that Imam Sahib al-Amr will come out from the dhari with the body of Abdullah al-Radhi covered in blood, and he will say, if there was the sin of the adults, then what was the sin of this child? The tradition mentions that the thirst that Abdullah al-Radhi was suffering, if the enemies would have left him for the rest of the day, this child would have died by itself. But at the manner in which Abdullah al-Radhi was killed, enter, if you are a parent and you have a child, then you know how painful it is to listen to the weeping and the wailing of your infant child. When you take your child, an infant, 6 months, when you take this newborn baby to a hospital, even if they are going to vaccinate it, they have a special injection for a child because the child is tiny and tender. Even a needle which is used is a needle which is different. Then what about the arrow that Karbala used in Karbala? Tonight is a night of Azaa for Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen. When you go to the Haram tonight, those of you who are blessed to be in Karbala, whether it is to the Mukhayyam or it is Tilla Zainabiyya or the Haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada, send your salams on Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen, Fatimat al-Zahra. Send your salams on Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen and give your condolences. We have a tradition in Bihar that mentions that on the eve, Yani Sham al-Ghariba, on the night which will be tomorrow, Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen in Alam al-Barzakh looked at the severed head of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and she cried in such a voice that the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began to shake. And from that time till today, every time Sayyidat Nisa'il Alameen looks at the blessed head of Imam Hussein, she cries in such a manner the arsh of Allah shakes. The fire of Jahannam, the waves begin to raise up. The Malaika come to Rasulullah and say to her, make Sayyidah Zahra quiet. For Rasulullah comes and he hugs Sayyidah Zahra and he tells her, my daughter Zahra, our affairs is in the hand of Allah and our affair is in the hand of the Mahdi Ajalallah. We seek forgiveness, Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman. If because of me and my sins your ghaibah has been prolonged, then forgive me for my sins. Today, 9th of Muharram, Tasu'ah. There was a day that historically symbolized a number of events. It is narrated that from the 3rd of Muharram up till the 7th of Muharram, every day from Kufa, Ibn Ziyad kept sending a number of people or a number of contingencies within the army to intensify the siege around Imam Hussein. Salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. So from the 3rd of Muharram, you find that groups or contingencies, the armies or units were deployed in their thousands or in their hundreds every day from the 3rd. Until it is narrated that on the 7th of Muharram, the group or the amount of armies from the side of Yazeed al-La'in and Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad al-La'in had reached up to 30 to 40,000 by the 7th of Muharram. And between the 7th and the 9th of Muharram, another 20,000 people were deployed. The final cavalry or the final contingency of the army of Ibn Ziyad came to Karbala today on the 9th of Muharram under the leadership of Shimr ibn Dhiljoshan al-La'in. He came with a cavalry of 4,000 people, and today the number of the army of Yazeed al-La'in was completed, 70,000 people. Which is why the poet says in one of his poems, woe be upon, may the la'na and the eternal damnation of Allah be upon the marauding army that came armed to the teeth with their evilish appearance and beating their drums of war, causing fear and terror within the children and the women of Ahlul Bayt. 70,000 of them reached today. You find at the time of Asr, Shimr bin Dhil Joshin comes with the letter that is given to him by Ibn Ziyad, and he portrays it to Umar ibn Sa'ad, because Umar ibn Sa'ad was the commander-in-chief of the army till of today. And the letter from Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad denotes an ultimatum, in that he ordered Umar ibn Sa'ad, upon the completion of the army now, to approach the tents of Imam Hussein and to give him a choice, that either he shall fight Imam Hussein today, or he shall succumb to the leadership or succumb to the obedience of Yazeed ibn Muawiyah. For the 9th of Muharram, the day of Tasu'ah, was initially the day of an ultimatum. You find on the day that passed us like today, the time of Asr, Umar ibn Sa'ad mobilizes his army and he cries out to them by saying, Ya khuyul Allah irkabi wa ibshiri. Umar ibn Sa'ad calls out to his army and he says, O army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look at how he addresses his army. O army of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ride your horses and bear glad tidings about Jannah. His motivation, thinking on an ideological level, that by waging war against the grandson of Rasulullah, these people will attain Jannah. This is a lesson for us, ahibba'i. Not everybody that says La ilaha illallah is from Ahlul Jannah or Ahlul Haq. Abadan. Not everybody who says Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad is from Ahlul Jannah or Ahlul Haq. La. Not everybody who recites Salat is from Ahlul Haq. Not everybody who fasts is from Ahlul Haq. Not everybody who goes for Hajj is Ahlul Haq. Abadan. People on the day of Ashura, there were 2 salat that were recited. There was salat in the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and there was salat in the camp of Umar ibn Sa'ad. On the day of Ashura, from these 70,000 people, at the dawn of Fajr, even they stood up and recited Salatul Fajr. Even they had an adhan where they said Allahu Akbar. On the 11th of Muharram, Umar ibn Sa'ad al-La'in collected all the people that were killed from his enemies. They recited Salatul Mayyit upon them and they buried them. Umar ibn Sa'ad al-La'in, after the event of Karbala, and to refer back to history, you see the title that was given to him, Hammamul Masjid, the dove of the masjid, because he spent his entire time after Karbala reciting salat and fasting. But he was deceived by Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, so he resorted to the masjid. This ibadah, did it benefit him? Abadan la. The salat and the Sawm and the Hajj of these people who fought against Imam Hussein has any value? La. The mi'yar, the lesson that you take from the event of Ashura into Janab as a soul that is seeking freedom is that the mi'yar, the criteria of haq and the batil is the wilayah of Muhammad and ala Muhammad. The difference between the salat of the people in the camp of Imam Hussein and the difference between their salat and the salat between the people who were there in the camp of Umar ibn Sa'ad was what? They have qiyam in their salat, we have qiyam. They have ruku, we have ruku. They have sajda, we have sujood. The difference between the salat of both the camps was wilayah of Ala Muhammad. One salah, because of wilayah, takes him to the highest level of victory. And that one, him, despite him reciting salah, la ila jahannam wa bi'sal masir. For Umar ibn Sa'ad calls out to his army, and they come marching towards the Mukhayyam and enter Janab Karbala al-Muqaddas. It is as if you can imagine that you are sitting in the Mukhayyam right now, and you see from the side of the Maidan that 30,000 or 70,000 people are marching towards the camps of Imam Hussein. The historians mention that Imam Hussein was sitting at the front of the tent with his sword in front of him, and he put his forehead on the sword while he was resting. And as he was resting in his dream, he has a dream, but as he is resting, the hooves of the horses and the beating of the war drums approaching towards the Mukhayyam. When Sayyida Zainab alayha salam al-Kubra hears that the enemies are approaching them and are near to them, she goes running towards Sayyida Shuhada. And enter Janab, you have seen in the Mukhayyam how close is the tent of Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra to the tent of Sayyida Shuhada. She comes to Imam Hussein and she wakes him and she says, "Oh brother, the enemies are approaching us, what shall we do?" All these are the events of today, 9th of Muharram, Yawm al-Tasu'ah. Imam Hussein looks at his sister, Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra, and he says to her, "Ra'aytu jaddi wa ra'aytu abi aliyun al-murtada wa ummi Fatima wa akhi al-Hasan wa kulluhum yakuluna ya Hussein anta ra'ihun ilayna ghadan." Imam al-Hussein looks at Sayyida Zainab and he sees, I saw my grandfather Rasulullah in the dream together with my father Amir al-Mu'mineen and my mother Fatima and my brother Hassan, all of them saying to me, "Oh Hussein, you are coming to us tomorrow." When Sayyida Zainab heard this, she understood what Imam al-Hussein meant. For the tradition says, فَصَاحَتْ زَيْنَبُ وَلَتَمَتْ وَجْهَهَا. Sayyida Zainab began to scream and began to hit her face out of azar. Imam al-Hussein holds Sayyida Zainab and he says to her, "My sister Zainab, this is not the time to shed tears." Why did Imam Hussein say this? Sayyida Zainab has much to see. She still has to see the body of Ali al-Akbar. She still has to be taken from Karbala to Kufa and Kufa to Sham bound in robes. Zainab have sabr. Sayyid al-Shuhada sends his brother Abul Fadl al-Abbas salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh in a contingency of 30 horsemen together with Habib ibn Madahir and Zuhair ibn Kain. And Imam al-Hussein says to him, "Go my brother Abbas and see what the enemies want from us." Imam al-Hussein leads this caravan or leads this group of 30 horsemen. They come to the middle of the Maidan. 30 men in front of an enemy whose numbers is 70,000 or more. Yet you find Abul Fadil, the peak of confidence, the peak of courage, his way and his style of riding the horse, his style of approaching the enemy was an exact replica of his father, Haydar al-Karrar, not wondering, not caring whether there are 70,000 or 100,000 of them. He leads the horsemen to the front of the battlefield. Habib on his right, Zuhair ibn Kain on his left, the rest of the 27 companions around them. They come to the middle of the Maidan. Abul Fadil disembarks from his horse. He stands in the middle with his sword and he calls out to Umar ibn Sa'ad and he says, "What is it that you want from us?" Umar ibn Sa'ad goes to Abul Fadil from a distance and he says to him that we have got a command from Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad that either you submit to the command and submit to the obedience of Yazeed ibn Muawiyah, or we shall engage you in battle right now. today. Imam al-Abbas, symbol of loyalty, symbol of obedience, such that even when Maulana Abul Fadil wants to utter a word, he does not do this except with the permission of his Mawla Sayyid al-Shuhada. He says to Umar ibn Sa'ad, wait until I seek the opinion of my master. He returns back to the tents while Habib and Zuhair ibn Kain speak to the enemies, admonish them, remind them of the day of judgment, remind them of the grave punishment that they will face for shedding the pure blood of the progeny of Rasulullah. Imam Abbas returns back to Sayyid al-Shuhada, and he tells them of the insistence of the army. Imam Hussein says to Abul Fadil, tell them that if they are bent or insistent upon waging war, then they should delay the war to the next day, yani the day of Ashura, to give us respite for a single night. Abul Fadil goes back to the Maidan, conveys the message. Shimr and Umar ibn Sa'ad al-La'in meet and consult between themselves, and they decide that the 10th day of Muharram, yani the day of tomorrow, will be the day of bloodshed and war. Abul Fadil, Zuhair ibn Kain, Habib ibn Madahir, and the rest return back to the camps. The question arises in that, why did Sayyid al-Shuhada delay the battle from the 9th to the 10th? It was not that Sayyid al-Shuhada was seeking, wal-ayadu billah, astaghfirullah from this kalam, that an extra few hours to live. La. He is the son of Haydar al-Karrar, that same Amir al-Mu'mineen who says we do not care if we advance towards death or death advances towards us. Abadan, Siratul Haq. And furthermore, Sayyid al-Shuhada knew from the narrations of his grandfather and the narrations of his father that he was going to be massacred and martyred in the plains of Karbala. So why did Imam al-Hussein delay the battle from Tasu'ah to the day of Ashura? Imam al-Hussein was willing and waiting to meet his Lord. He could have met his Lord on the 9th, but he decided to delay the meeting with the Lord on the 10th. Why? Every action of a ma'soom imam has multiple dimensions of hikmah. The imam is infallible in his judgment. Rather, the imam is the peak of wisdom. Tonight we shall discuss perhaps 4 avenues or 4 dimensions as to why explaining or uncovering the wisdom behind the decision of the imam to delay the battle from Tasu'ah, the 9th day, to the 10th day. Number 1, Sayyid al-Shuhada used the night of Ashura as an imtihan for his companions, to test the loyalty of his companions, and through this imtihan, the daraja and the adama of the companions of Imam al-Hussein would be higher than what it was. Their daraja and their adama was great to begin with. For 3 days they have been suffering thirst. For 3 days they are hungry. They had the opportunity to abandon the Imam, but they didn't. For this stance in itself, their adama was great. But Imam al-Hussein wanted to test their loyalty to the highest level. Not only to test them as in to test their nafs, but to show the entire world the ashab that Imam al-Hussein had. What was their real daraja? That even when things become more difficult and you give them an imtihan in the most difficult of times, they do not waver, but because of the imtihan they become much more stronger. These are the caliber of the ashab of the Imam. With an imtihan they do not become weak, no, they become stronger. The narration tells us, and we touched upon this in a few nights back, Imam al-Hussein gathers his companions after Salatul Maghrib or around the time of Maghrib on a night like this. And he says to them after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I do not know of any companions who are much better and more loyal than my companions, and any Ahlul Bayt, I do not know of any family members or progeny who are more loyal and more deserving than my progeny. And this is where the imtihan was. He says to his companions, the enemies are behind me. The enemies want to shed my blood. The enemies want to capture me. If the enemies capture me, they will not care about my companions, you 72 people around you. The only reason why they will shed your blood is because you are defending me. If they capture me, they will not care whether you live or you die, they will leave you. For Imam Hussein says to his companions, I give you permission to take the cover of this night and for all of you to leave me alone in Karbala. This bay'ah that you have given me, I free you of this bay'ah, and tomorrow in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you have no responsibility. But Imam al-Hussein is saying, look at the type of the imtihan. Imam al-Hussein is saying to them, leave me, save your lives, return back to your family members, and I give you the man, I give you a guarantee that you are not responsible in front of Allah. You could say this ashab, were they prone or would they succumb to temptation or no? The response from the Sahabi, the first one, Maulana Abul Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, he stands up and he says to Sayyid al-Shuhada, وَلِمَا نَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ, why would we do that? لِنَبْكَ بَعْدَكَ, so that we can live in this dunya without you. There is no value for life without you. Never shall we leave you. After that, the children of Aqil, they said, oh uncle, do we abandon you in times of difficulty while we lived with you in times of goodness? And Muslim ibn Awsa just stands up and he says, Ya Aba Abdullah, I will stand with you and fight and defend you until the last drop of my blood. I shall attack them with my sword and my spear, and if I do not have any weapons, I will pick up stones and throw stones at them. To that daraja I will defend you. And then came up Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, whose words we described a few nights back. This imtihan, in that the companions were given an option to achieve Jannah while saving their lives, the Ashab refused that. They said, if we enter Jannah through Shahada with our Imam. This shows you the daraja of the Ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Hakkan, one of the ulama, say it is from the right that when a person enters into the Haram al-Sharif and he stands in front of the Shuhada, he salutes them for the stance that they carried out. An inspiration to mankind. Number one, imtihan. In this imtihan, the Imam tested them in such a way that they would gain the highest level of success. But there is no more level after the level of the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada. This was one. The first reason. Number two, and this is the reason that Sayyid al-Shuhada gave to the enemies through Maulana Abul Fadl. Imam al-Hussein said to them, give us one night of respite such that we may spend this night worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ibadah, such that we may pray to our Lord and we may worship Him. Because indeed, you know, and my Lord knows how much I love to engage in salah. Laylatul Ashura was a night of ibadah, was a night of salat, was a night of Quran. The ibadah of Ahlul Bayt and the ashab of Ahlul Bayt was such that through their ibadah they were able to gravitate people towards them. When you look at a face that is shining brighter than the moon, weeping out of awe from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in sujood doing dhikr, this has an effect on the ruh of the person. But this ibadah, this recitation of Quran, this recitation of salat was the reason for their steadfastness and firmness in the battlefield for the next day. Therefore, this salat and this Quran was a preparation for their nafs to remain steadfast on the battlefield the next day. Their steadfastness on the battlefield was due to the fact that they had the highest level of iman and taqwa. Nurturing and building this taqwa through ibadat. Therefore, ibadah has a great role in building the courage of a person in the battlefield. This is a lesson given to us by Sayyid al-Shuhada. Number two, this ibadat and this salat was a reason through which Imam Hussein was able to attract 32 people from the army of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. The historians mention that on a night like this, there were armies or contingencies from the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad. They would come and they would circle the tents of Imam Hussein from far. Come, and you can say, in our day and age, gather surveillance. When these 32 people, and there were a number of them, but however hundreds of them they were from the enemy ranks, when they came and they saw Imam Hussein and his companions engrossed in salat and ibadat and munajat, crying out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with tears, 32 people from the tent or from the camp of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad converted, repented, and joined the side of Imam Hussein. Just by looking at the ibadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. They said, this is the ibadah of a person who is divine. We cannot fight against him. Therefore, this second answer leads us to the third answer as to why the Imam delayed the battle from the 9th to the 10th. It was actually respite. The Imam gave them another opportunity to recognize haqq and abandon batil. When Imam asked to delay the battle from 9th to 10th, it was actually a source of rahmah for the enemies. He gave them yet another opportunity to find haqq and not fight against them. 32 people took this opportunity, recognized this haqq and this nur of wilaya, and they stood with the Imam. One of these people, his name was Zuhair ibn Salim al-Asadi. He came, put his sword into the sheath, came crawling to the Imam, sought repentance, and the next day, the day of Ashura, he was the first person to stand in the line with Imam and was killed in the general battle that occurred. The first reason, imtihan. The second reason, ibadat. The third reason, this delay of the battle to give the opposition yet another chance to find the true path, to attain Jannah and not drive themselves into the pits of Jahannam. Number 4, the Imam used that 9th night, or yani the 10th night, as a night or as a time to devise the military tactics for war which that they were going to engage in the next day, yani the day of Ashura. Apart from the ibadat and apart from the Quran, the Imam used this night to plan the military tactics. Intum sawwaru, the camp of Imam Hussein, give or take 72 companions. The side of Umar ibn Sa'ad, 70,000. What is the ratio? 1 to 10,000. 1 to 10,000. Despite this ratio, how did the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada ensure to prolong the battle until the time of Asr? Why? From the time of Fajr to the time of Asr, minimum of at least 8 hours, 7 hours. How did the companions of Imam Hussein manage to keep away an army of 70,000, a ratio of 1 to 10,000, 1 to 1,000, afwan. The ratio 1 to 1,000. How did they manage to keep away a ratio of 1 to 1,000 for over 8 hours? Aslan, militarily speaking, the battle should have been finished in 2 or 3 hours. Apart from the might and the caliber of the men that were standing on the battlefield, it was the military tactics that were planned on the night of Ashura under the leadership of Sayyid al-Shuhada, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and the commander and the standard bearer of the army, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Historians mention that up to the 9th of Muharram, the tents of the companions of Imam al-Husayn were a little bit widespread, in that the designing of the tents, it formed a circle. You had an outer circle, and then you had an inner circle, and then within the inner circle you had the heart. The outer circle was comprised of the tents of the Ashab. Within this circle, they formed a circle. Within this circle was the tents, there was a circle of the tents of Bani Hashim. Yani the Ashab are defending Bani Hashim. And within the tents of Bani Hashim, the smaller circle was the tent of the women of Ahlul Bayt. The tents of Sayyida Zainab and Sayyida Layla and Sayyida Rabab. So the companions, the way the setup was, the companions defending the Bani Hashim and the Bani Hashim defending the women. And at the front of all the Sahabi was the tent of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. On the 10th night, so there was a distance between the tents of the companions. It was widespread over a distance. On the 10th night, Imam al-Husayn advised the companions, bring your tents close to each other now. The closer the tents are, the smaller the distance between the tents, the easier it is to protect the tents. Which is why when you go to the Khaymaga or to the Mukhayyam now, the format of the tents that you see is the format of the tents after the time Imam al-Husayn said bring the tents together. Otherwise, before that, the distance was a little bit awsa, was a little bit wider. So they brought all the tents together. The fact that the tents are together now, it is easier to defend the tents. Why? Because the side of Umar ibn Sa'ad, la'in, people who are khabith, from the first day or from the first beat of the war drum on the day of Ashura, their target was the tents and the tents of the women. La'natullah alayhim. You will find this was their goal and their objective from the very first beat of the war drum. Which is why we shall see as to why the Imam took other further steps. So long as the tents of the women are close to each other, it is easy to protect them. This was one. Number two, Imam al-Husayn, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, commanded the companions to dig a khandak, to dig a trench behind the Khaymaga, behind the Mukhayyam. If you are in Karbala al-Muqaddas, if you are at the Mukhayyam, if you stand at the Khaymaga, your back towards the Khaymaga, and you are facing the Haram of Imam al-Husayn, this Haram of Imam al-Husayn onwards and the Sahan is what constitutes or what constituted approximately of the Maidan. So you have the Mukhayyam, and then you have the Till, it's like a small mountain, Till al-Zainabiyya, and then you have the Haram of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein was martyred in the middle of the Maidan. Therefore, this Haram is Sharif, the area of the Haram, area Bain al-Haramain, between the Mukhayyam and the Haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada. This was known as the Maidan. Majority of the battle happened in this area. And you see the Maqam of Ali al-Akbar alayhi salam. A lot of the enemies had gathered on that side. The side which you see the market and the shops. Now, a big part of the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad al-La'in had gathered on that side. Because in the Maqtal we read, when Marra al-La'in struck Ali al-Akbar on the head, Ali al-Akbar hugged the horse. But because the blood was falling on the horse ran into the direction of the enemies. So we understand that that part was all filled with the enemies. Therefore, they formed an arch around the khaymagah, around the tents of the women. Which is why Imam al-Hussein commanded his companions that the back of the khaymagah, they should dig a khandak. They should dig a trench which is the form of an ark or the shape of an ark. How these companions dug a khandak after 3 days of hunger and thirst, Allahu A'lam. But they dug this khandak, the trench, and they filled it with firewood and with twigs. And on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein ordered his companions to light this khandak on fire. Therefore, nobody from the enemies can come and attack them from the back. Now, militarily, this is a tactic. So long as the back of the khaymagah is protected by a burning khandak and nobody can cross over it, they have itmi'nan that there cannot be any counter attack. So now they focus their attack from the front. And from the front, they divided themselves into 3. They had the center, the heart of the army, which was Bani Hashim, the left wing and the right wing, for whom Habib ibn Madahir and Zuhair ibn Kain were in charge. And then the left side or the western side of the Khaymagah had already got tills, hillocks, small mountains, that in itself formed a natural barrier as a form of protection, in that if they wanted to attack from this side, they couldn't come in a mass army of 3,000. They could come probably in single files or double files. And these men sustained their ground and kept them away. And from one of these tills, that is why you find Sayyidah Zainab came to the till and she saw the maqtal of Sayyidah Shuhada. Therefore, to conclude, the Imam delayed the battle from Tasu'ah to Ashura for a number of reasons, 4 of which, number 1, he prolonged or delayed the battle for an imtihan for his companions to spend the night in ibadah and worship. Number 3, it was a respite or an opportunity for the enemies to think again over what they were going to do, and 32 people came. Number 4, this night was used to plan and devise the military tactics for the coming day. Antum, Ahibba'i, you are extremely blessed. We are extremely blessed to be in Karbala on the night of Ashura. Hadith by our 6th Imam, which we narrated in the beginning of the khutbah, states, من بات عند كبر الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه ليلة عاشوراء لقى الله يوم القيامة ملتخ بدمائه كأنه قتل مع الحسين عليه السلام في أصبته. The thawab and the reward of the person who visits Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Sadiq says, the person who spends the night of Ashura at the grave of Imam al-Husayn and obviously follows it up to the day of Ashura, his reward on the day of judgment is that he will be raised on the day of Qiyamah in the Mahshar, covered in his own blood, as if he was killed fighting alongside Imam al-Husayn. For tonight, we need to try and replicate the atmosphere and the sentiments within our hearts, like what was similar to the ashab of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You find on this night, yes, they recited Quran. On this night, they spent a night, yes, reciting Salah. But at the same time, they spent this night encouraging each other, motivating each other to stand firm in the path of wilayah. They sat together, they sharpened their weapons, they encouraged each other. And they repeated their loyalty towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. The fact that they didn't abandon the Imam, they reaffirmed their loyalty, their pledge of allegiance to the Imam. Therefore, it becomes incumbent upon us that being here on the night of Ashura and our viewers, wherever they are in any part of the world, is that you renew your pledge of allegiance to Sayyid al-Shuhada. Enter through your aza and through your matam, you pledge your loyalty to Sayyid al-Shuhada. Until we receive this day of great tragedy, where the angels wept and the jinn wept, the Hurul Ain wept, everything within the realm of existence wept for Imam Hussein. The day of Ashura. The Maktal narrates to us that from the time of Fajr, after the time Sayyid al-Shuhada delivered the two khutbahs towards the enemies, but they did not respond to him, and the battle began. The first part of the battle was a general skirmish. But within this first battle, the historians mention that from the 72 companions, 50 of the companions of Imam Hussein were killed within the first battle that occurred. Allahu Akbar wa inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The narration mentions that the remainder of the companions went into a one-on-one battle until each and every one of them received martyrdom, and then came the time of Bani Hashim. Ali al-Akbar went to the battlefield but never returned. Qasim went to the battlefield but never returned. The children of Aqil, Muhammad and Abdullah went to the battlefield but they didn't return. Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra gave her own in Muhammad in the way of Abu Abdullah. Abu al-Fadl sent his brother Ja'far and Abdullah and Uthman in the way of Sayyid al-Shuhada. From the time of Fajr till the time of Asr, this Madloom Imam Sayyid al-Shuhada was walking between the Khayma to the Maidan, from the Maidan back to the Khayma. Sometimes he's lifting the body of Abbas, sometimes the body of Habib, and sometimes the body of Qasim, sometimes the body of Ali al-Akbar. The tradition mentions that time of Asr came on the day of Ashura, that even Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas was not there with Hussein. Mawla Abbas by the side of Al-Kamil, lying on the sands of Karbala. Do not ask me how Abbas was lying on the sands of Karbala, but this is an Abbas without two arms. Imam al-Hussein looked at his companions from every direction. He looked at them lying down covered in their bloods, and he cried out to them, "Oh my companions, where are you? Oh Habib, you are the one who said to me that I shall never leave you. Where are you, Habib?" He would look and he would say, Muslim ibn Awsaja, you promised that we shall never leave this dunya alone. I shall never be. Where are you, Muslim? I am all alone. Sayyid al-Shuhada turned towards the Maidan and he said, Hal min nasirin yansurna. Is there anyone to help us? Is there anyone who fears Allah who shall protect us? 1400 years later, today here we are, Abu Abdullah. Look at Karbala al-Muqaddas. Tens and thousands of people shouting, Labbaika ya Hussein. The tradition mentions Imam al-Hussein went into the tent to bid farewell to the women for the last time. He asked for the Abba of Rasulullah. He put it on to him. Sayyida Zainab comes with an infant, Abdullah al-Radhi Ali al-Asghar. Imam al-Hussein says, show me my son Abdullah, yet that I may bid farewell and kiss him for a final time. Sayyida Zainab al-Kubra goes to Sayyida Rabab. They bring Aliyun al-Asghar. The narration mentions that Imam Hussein would kiss him on the forehead and would look at him. The historians mention for 3 days this infant had not drank milk or had not had a drop of water. One of the traditions, one of the older maqatil says that Abdullah al-Radi, when Sayyida Zainab brought him to Imam Hussein, the eyes of this infant had gorged inside due to lack of milk. The baby did not have even the energy to cry. The Naqtal mentions Abdullah wasn't crying because in order to cry, a baby needs energy or nutrition. One of the ulama say that Abdullah al-Radi was struggling to remove voices to show that he's thirsty. Imam al-Hussein put on his abba. Imam al-Hussein put on his abba and he took the infant in his arms and he walked towards the Maidan. He covered Abdullah al-Radi with his abba from the heat of the sun. As he walked into the Maidan, the enemies looked at him. They thought perhaps that this man has brought the Quran with him. Now he wants to make the Quran a judge between us and him. The narration mentions, Antum in Karbala al-Muqaddas, now your hearts are in the maqam of Aliyun al-Asghar. Wallah, you are standing with Sayyid al-Shuhada and you are watching what is happening to Imam al-Hussein. Ahibai, Adamana lak al-ajr, Imam Sahib al-Amri wal-Zaman. This Imam who weeps tears of blood. Masiba of Abdullah al-Radi is very dear to Imam al-Hujjah. Imam al-Hussein stands in the middle of the Maidan with this infant. He cries out to the people. He says to Umar ibn Sa'ad, you have killed my companions. You have killed all my family members. No one remains from my family except this infant. Feed him with a drop of water. If the adults have a sin, then what is the sin of this child? The narration mentions that the enemies looked at each other and there became a disagreement between them. Some of them said, feed the child with water. Some of them said, kill him and kill all his entire family. Umar ibn Sa'ad turned towards Hurmala. Umar ibn Sa'ad turned towards Hurmala. He said to him that complete or finish off with the reason of the disagreement in our army. Hurmala says that I looked towards Hussein and I looked towards the infant. I removed the 3-pronged arrow from the arrows that I had. I removed the 3-pronged arrow and I set it across my bow. Hurmala says that I was looking and I was taking my aim towards the infant. At that time a part of the wind blew and the covering or the garment of Aliyun al-Asghar flew up in the air. Hurmala says that I saw the neck of this infant. Hurmala says that I saw the neck of this infant. I set my target. Allah, Hurmala shot a 3-pronged arrow. The Maktal mentions فَضَبَحَهُ مِنَ الْوَرِيدِ إِلَى الْوَرِيدِ. The arrow pierced Ali Asghar on one side of the jugular vein and came out on the other side. The narration mentions that when the arrow hit Ali al-Asghar, the narration mentions that Ali al-Asghar began to flatter in the arms of his father, just like when you remove a fish from the water.